Hi, I thought I'd go through a sample report essay with you and kind of identify some of these key features that I mentioned above and think about how they're working in this particular essay. So you should be reading this essay anyway for this week because it's a pretty good example of a report, and it might help you as you're kind of thinking about how to approach this next assignment. But it's called Does Texting Affect Writing? Starting here on page 132-ish. So let's kind of think about how it's using some of these key features that really any report should have. So first of all, like I said above, a report should have a tightly focused topic. So notice that this writer is not just talking about texting as a whole. I mean, that brings up a whole lot of issues, right? Texting and how often kids should be doing it. Texting and the dangers that people get into. Like, there are a lot of issues with texting. So if she tried to write on all of those, it wouldn't be a nice focused report. She narrows it down and only wants to think about how texting affects writing in school, right? So what she does, and I mean, you might think about this when you're coming up with a topic for your own report, is even in the title, she poses a question, and this is the question that she's trying to answer by doing her research, right? So what you guys might try to do is, instead of coming up with a general topic like, I want to do a report on texting, think of a question that you want to try to find the answer to through your reporting. And again, that might help you to narrow it down and make it a more focused sort of report. So I think that's working well here. Another key feature is to use accurate, well-researched information, right? So let's just look at some of the types of information that she's using in this essay. So really the first instance of any research comes in this section here, concerns about text speak. So again, you guys, when you're writing your own essays, you don't have to include headings like this. What we want to think about is this is really an article written for a publication, which is a bit different than writing an essay for school. But I think it does help here in kind of breaking down these different aspects of texting that she's going to talk about, right? So really the first sort of research she includes is from this article from USA Today called Texting Destroys Kids' Writing Style, right? So, she's including a newspaper article, probably online, right? So that's a good source to use, probably just to get some general data, right? But later on, you'll see, right here in this paragraph, she's bringing in some other information, right? From someone named Naomi Barron, from somebody named Walsh, from somebody named Carey. You might say, well, we don't know what these publications are, right? But in her works cited page, if I can scroll down here, again, whenever you're including outside sources, really, you should include a works cited page to list all the information. Again, we'll talk about that more specifically in next week's learning module. But here, she lists all the sources that she used in order to do this report. So some of these names that we saw above, like Carey was one of them, right? We learn, oh, this is an article from the Miami Herald, this newspaper, and she got it from a database called Academic OneFile. So again, she's using databases to find a lot of this information, right? I think one of the other names we saw was Walsh, right? So we have this article here. Again, it's from a newspaper, but she accessed it through a database. Again, we're going to talk about databases later on in this learning activity. There was a citation that just said should, right? Because there's no author for this particular article. But this is from a source called NEA Today, which is like a journal. Again, she got it from this database called ProQuest, right? So I think just in general, this is like a good lesson to you, explaining why we include these in-text citations in our essays, right? So again, let me scroll up here. So the idea is that if I'm reading this person's article and I see a citation that just says should, what that tells me is on the works cited page, I want to look for this source that begins with should. And then that's going to give me all the information that I need if I wanted to actually go find this source. So right here, I'm looking for should. Oh, okay, it's this article called Should We Worry or LOL, right? So if I wanted to actually go find this article and read it through, she gives me all the information I need to go find it, right? So the point is your works cited entries should match your in-text citations. That's why they're there, to give important information and help an audience find these sources if they really wanted to go look for them, right? So, again, uses quite a few pieces of outside information, but a lot of this essay is this writer doing her own research. So she chooses to do a survey to get people's opinions about how texting affects writing. So here she talks about, what she does and how she conducts this survey. And then she has a section where she explains what she found, the results of that survey, right? And how she interprets them. So this essay uses a mix of both outside research and what's called empirical research, where you do the research yourself and gather information. So again, this is a feature of reports, using good research, well, whether it's stuff that you find through articles or whether it's stuff that you find through your own sort of surveys or observations. Another key feature that I mentioned is a synthesis of ideas. If you remember from a previous learning activity, I mentioned kind of these three main types of writing that you'll do for college. Summary, analysis, both of which you did in the previous essay. But now we're in this third type of writing called synthesis. And if you remember, this is when you're pulling from multiple sources and kind of combining those sources to give an explanation of a subject, right? So as I mentioned before, you wouldn't want to just look at one article and say, oh, here's a report on such and such topic, right? It's going to be a lot more credible and accurate if you pull from multiple different sources and kind of give their explanation. You're going to get a more complete version of the truth when you pull from these multiple sources, right? So again, let's kind of think about how this writer is doing this. So in this first section, she's including research from all the people who are concerned about text speak in writing. So she's giving quotations from a couple or a few different articles that think texting is bad. It's having a negative effect about writing. But notice that this report also brings up a lot of research that disagrees with those other articles, right? So, this writer's own research kind of contradicts what those other articles are saying. What this writer finds is that actually texting may not have as much of a negative impact as people think that it does. And when she's talking about the discussion of her findings, where she's interpreting her own research, that's where she starts to bring in articles from people who, have a different viewpoint than those people who are worried that texting is bad, right? She brings up this guy, Dennis Barron, who says, no, I mean, this concern about texting and how it's negatively affecting writing, he says that's blown out of proportion, right? So my point is that when you're doing a report, you shouldn't just find information that all says the same thing, right? It's fine and probably good if you find articles or sources that have slightly or very different views on this topic. Because again, you're giving a more complicated assessment of it if you give these different viewpoints rather than whatever, several articles all saying exactly the same thing. That's where a lot of people go wrong. They think, oh, if I find 10 articles that all say exactly the same thing, that's really proving some idea or perspective, right? But actually what we're looking for is more of an accurate or, more complex view that incorporates multiple viewpoints. So just keep that in mind. But again, in this essay, this is all organized very well. Like I said earlier, she talks about all the people's research who think that texting is bad. And then she shifts into the research that shows that texting is not quite as bad as people seem to think, right? So it might be good to kind of group similar types of articles together rather than kind of incorporating them randomly into your paper, right? So I think this essay does a pretty good example of that. As far as various writing strategies that this writer is using, for sure, one of the things that she's doing is defining. Let me try to scroll up here. It's kind of hard with these online text. Gosh. Hold on. My computer is not scrolling up here. Well, I guess I don't need to actually show you the part. But in the very beginning of this essay, there are two very clear definitions. One of them is when she defines texting. And you might say, well, that's stupid. Everybody knows what texting is, right? But again, she gives us a definition to kind of set the tone and remind us that texting is about sending messages and communicating, right? And that's relevant to her topic because that's what writing in general is trying to do as well, right? And so it kind of raises this question, is texting just another form of communication that's just different from writing? Or is it actually harming that previous type of communication, writing, that we're more used to, right? So again, even if a definition seems stupid, like why would I define this thing that everybody knows already? If it's relevant to what you're trying to report, again, this is about communication, then maybe give that definition just so you're clear. Another definition that she uses at the beginning is she defines what text speak is. And again, it's this use of shortcuts when you're writing, like LOL, OMG, using numbers for things, right? And that's important because the question is this text speak making its way into writing assignments that students are doing for school? And if so, what is the effect of that? Is that bad, or is that just something different that's happening in terms of communication? So again, defining is one of these things that you might do, especially if it's a term you can imagine might be unfamiliar to your audience, right? She's comparing and contrasting in here, right? She's using all these different sources and comparing them and say, oh, these articles are saying similar things, these articles are saying something different, and here's why. Again, she's talking about types, like types of texting that teachers might be seeing in writing versus the type of texting or situations that students see. So again, all that stuff is, looking at this topic in various ways, which is good. The last key feature, and I've already kind of touched on it, is giving clear definitions. You never want to assume that your audience has a lot of knowledge about the topic that you're discussing. Remember, for this essay, you're pretty much the expert on it. So make sure that any key terms that you're using that you've defined, either like how the general public defines these things, or how you're defining it in your particular essay, right? So again, maybe take a look at this essay closely, because I think it's a pretty good example that you might use as a model as you are starting to work on your essay number 3. Okay, thanks. Bye.